So thank you again for accepting our invitation to be our guest stars here. And maybe we can start right with the presentations. I think the first, according to the program, is Stan, or?
Yes, that's right, Desislav.
Yeah, could you please try to share your presentation first?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the room provided by Insurtech and we are very grateful to Desislav and Insurtech Hub Balkans to give us this opportunity to bring some of the representatives of the Irish Insurtech community to share our experiences. And I will start our session today with a rather generic but very important talk about the role of data in insurance. Before we begin, a couple of words about myself. So my name is Stan Nazarenko. I'm the co-founder of Insurtech Ireland. I'm also the CEO of an Irish Insurtech startup called PipRate. And my career has been split 50-50 between asset management and insurance industries. As we started our Insurtech journey about 4 years ago, as we founded Insurtech Ireland, we noticed that regardless of the topic of many different conversations and discussions we had, data was one of the overarching concepts which was touched almost in every time somebody was talking about Insurtech and insurance in general. So it's a very important topic, and at PipRate, we are aiming to solve the insurance industry fundamental data sharing problems. So as you can imagine, I spent 5 years of my life recently researching into the subject very deeply and trying to understand how we do things with data in insurance, what we should do better, and what it means in general for the consumer, for the insurtechs, and for the incumbents. The first thing I would like to cover is the overall process, how we collect data in insurance, and I would say in general in any other similar situations. So you may be surprised to think about this way, that the process, how we do it, is probably more than 4,500 years old. So the way I like to describe it is a peasant and scribe problem. So you can imagine in ancient Egypt when peasant came to store with a sack of wheat, and the scribe was asking, okay, so what's your name and what do you have? Well, I'm such and such, and I have my sack of wheat. So he would describe what was said diligently in a papyrus and then say, well, thank you very much for your information. I will see you next year. And that is very similar to what's happening still in insurance as a kind of a policy buying process when we talk to our customers. So what's different though is the medium, because we started with papyrus and now we're talking about mobile phones. And the reason why this process remains this way and has been like this for so long is the underlying nature of this interaction, which is driven by the asymmetry in access to tools. So back then, only the scribes had the papyrus, the peasants didn't. Then later, we switched different media. So in 1960s, only insurers had mainframes, the customers didn't. And every time we changed the media and progressed to different stage of this process, the amount of time required to make this change had been decreasing substantially. So it took almost 4,000 years to give everyone access to paper. It took probably 50 years to give everyone access to a mainframe-like facility, like for personal computers. It took 10 years to give everyone a portable mainframe, also known as a mobile phone, which we can carry with internet access all the time with us. So the technology gap is shrinking, and access to tools and difference in access is getting reduced more and more. And in my opinion, what's left specifically for insurance, now that everyone has these technological and hardware capabilities, is superior knowledge of risk management methodology and data analytics. That is the next forefront of this gap closing even smaller. So again, when we started our Insurtech journey, we wanted to understand what's going on and how we can improve the process. And traditionally in insurance, we capture the data about our books of business using Excel spreadsheets, PDF files, paper databases. There's all traditional sources. And now we're seeing completely new sources like Internet of Things, sensor data, information about your driving coming from either your mobile app or your connected car. And the question is, are we as an industry ready to ingest this data and process this data? And what does it mean for the customer? And 4 years ago, when we developed a couple of propositions and approached potential customers in the insurance industry to understand the appetite for them to adopt it, we quickly realized that the initial feedback was different from what we expected. So it was less about efficiency, less about working with customer, but it was all about data protection, because it was the year of 2017. Everyone was talking about GDPR. And back then, of course, there were many different surveys conducted with the overall consumer-based base, and specifically, as an example, in 2017, a survey done in the Dutch market showed that the consumer sentiment towards GDPR was that from next year, like 2018, consumers were likely to retrieve their personal data, their new digital right under GDPR, in 48% of cases. That was what was found out back then. And the question is that something which we are seeing now when GDPR is in place for almost 3 years? Well, it's just my opinion, but I don't think there has been a revolution in the way consumers approach data insurance. Obviously, there is a growing interest in what's going on there, but we didn't see a dramatic change in behavior. And speaking of preparedness and specifically GDPR fines, the numbers of fines across the European Union have been substantial, with Italy leading the list with 76 million fines issued so far. But interestingly enough, if we're talking about insurance only, it took me some time to find the biggest fine to date, and the one I found was a German health insurer. In 2020, they were fined 1.24 million for violating certain GDPR legislation. And as you can imagine, this is not huge by the industry standards. So I think overall, we as an industry approached GDPR very well, and I'd say it wasn't really unexpected because we were reasonably good in this capacity. But back to my point, is that the main driver? Is that the main concern from the insurer's perspective around how data is moving across the value chain? Well, let's look at that. In parallel, there have been Insurtech revolution happening, revolution or evolution, depending on how you look at it. But what we can see now is a large number of propositions to enhance customer experience, reducing fraud, of course, improving underwriting. And the majority of Insurtech propositions are data-driven. So there is more data coming into the market about the customers, from the customers. new data sets are being developed, and it all sounds rosy. However, there are also some downsides there too, because first of all, there are ethical concerns specifically about AI and the way data sets are constructed. As you can imagine, a lot of the data, the new data, which is used by insurtechs to improve customer experience, comes from other insurance customers, and legally it's all absolutely fine and bulletproof, because there was some fine print somewhere in the form that it's fine to share this data. But is it fully ethical? Well, it depends on a case-by-case basis, and sometimes I would say it's not completely ethical how it's been done. But then it is very attractive. You can probably all heard about new propositions about being able to issue policies in seconds after answering 6 or 7 questions. And of course, the big question is, if the data doesn't come from the customer, where does it come from? Then also, if we're talking about AI, of course, there's a danger of implicit bias. We need to really understand, have a deep understanding how specific models were trained, how they were constructed. And the other issue with this approach is the well-known principle in software development, garbage in, garbage out. So if the source data which was used to train the model is not good enough, the answer will not be good enough either. And this is a very important concept, which touches upon the concept of provenance, data provenance. So in order to be comfortable with data which we use to either issue a quote or understand our book of business or process claims, we need to have a very clear understanding of data quality of the underlying data, and also ability to reproduce the same outcome. Because if you are a buyer of insurtech services, and if somebody sells you a very sophisticated model which simplifies the processes, if it's not reproducible, if they change slightly the data that they retrain the model with a couple of years later, you may realize that the answers will change dramatically. And if you don't know why, this is a big problem. And to further emphasize this point, let's take a look at an example. In a very basic example, if you have like risk alpha, which is, let's say, specific customer, if we learn some information about this customer through one data source, most likely the customer themselves, well, that's fine, that's okay, but we want to know more. So the good example on the top right quadrant is we would probably buy industry databases, where we would engage with some insurtechs to get information from more sources, and that's what we want. And that would be the ideal outcome. But in reality, what happens very often is, if you look at the bottom left quadrant, when we buy data from several providers, but all these providers use the same data source, so therefore we pay more, but we're not getting any more insights into the data. And the really ugly example is in the bottom right quadrant, when we buy data from several providers, but all of them are using the same broken or outdated source of information. So therefore, we pay more money and we actually gain wrong insights into the underlying risks. I think the most important question, though, is to keep asking ourselves, what do customers actually want? And based on my experience working with insurtechs, the majority of insurtechs to date are really helping the incumbents, not exactly the customer. And this is a big problem, in my opinion. So let's look at what customers actually want. So if you ask, it depends on how you frame the question. The typical answers would be, of course, the customers want a good selection of policies. They want policies to be clear and easy to understand. They want smooth interactions. They want easy and fast claim process. And overall, the overall message is all they really want is they want protection, they want security, they want peace of mind in the end of the day. And if you ask them about privacy, data protection, new data coming in, again, it depends how you ask the question, but almost no one would be saying that the data rights is a very important component of their buying process and whether they would buy insurance or not, because it really depends on how you frame the question. What if we do it slightly differently? So there was a very interesting survey conducted globally by IBM Institute of Business Value in 2017, around the same time pre-GDPR, and they had very deep focus on data sharing and how consumer feels about the data. So only 11% of respondents said that they were willing to share the data if they had little or no control over it. And this number jumped substantially to 65% if they believed they had control. That's a very, very big jump, and it really tells you something about the consumer sentiment in this area. Similar about ownership of the information, who owns the data. If you use this brand new Insurtech proposition and you use your mobile phone to collect your driving data, who does it belong to? Is it you or the insurer or is it Insurtech? That's a very big question. And everyone pretty much believes that the appetite and acceptance for data sharing will only grow in the next 10 years. The benefits. So why would customers share more data? So if you ask them, it is surprising that only 20% of insurance respondents believed that they would gain access to savings through sharing more information. 47% yet would expect some personalized services, and we'll go back to it in a few minutes. But only 33% believed that by sharing more data, they would find services or products more quickly. That's also a very important data point. That was 2017. If we jump to 2020, another Irish company, Truata, they're an Irish RegTech company, conducted a very interesting survey globally around the sentiment towards data. So according to this survey, 77% believe that the data should be their property, not the company's asset. That's quite an important signal here. And 66% are more likely to be loyal to the brand if they trusted the way the data was used. Speaking of personalization, which is one of the big selling points of many Insurtech propositions around, only 45% of respondents find it that the tracking for personalization was invasive. And further than that, 24% found it sinister, and only 22% found that they're actually saving money from buying personalized products that used tracking. Again, based on my experience, it's very, very hard to understand directly the consumer sentiment in data sharing context, because loss of control is like fast food. It doesn't kill you instantly, but it gets worse and worse as more and more data gets produced. So what are the next steps? What can we do about it? As I said in my very first slide, the biggest component of the gap which remains between the consumer and the incumbents is superior knowledge of risk management techniques, and data analytics. And I strongly believe this is where the biggest focus will and should be in the future. At PipRate, we tried to do something in this area, and last year we launched a cyclist insurance product together with Babel Cover in Malta, we choose a completely different way how we collect data from the customers and how we use it. So from the initial point when it's a fully digital product, so it was based on mobile app. So from very first time they registered in the app, every single piece of data which they put in was put into their personal data wallet, which was then shared with the insurer. And at all times, this data remained in the custody of the customer. So what were our takeouts from that launch, from that product? First of all, of course, there was an overwhelmingly positive experience, feedback from customers around fully digital products and being able to just use your mobile phone to buy insurance very quickly. Speaking of more fundamental questions, as their data rights and so forth, this is going to take several years to fully understand what is the outcome, because it needs several renewal cycles to really gain benefits from this approach and see what the actual customer feedback is. However, I strongly believe that this should be the way of the future, that we really should start sharing risk intelligence and insights back to the customer as a must-have function. So it's educational function towards the customers. And I believe one of the talks later this afternoon from John Byrne may touch and may share some of these experiences. And again, speaking of the tool access gap, historically, the way we buy insurance was dramatically different between a personal private client and large corporate client. You would hardly just ask a big corporate client to fill out the form. You would send somebody to talk to them to understand their real needs, what they want, what they require to fill their insurance requirements. And I believe this is where the next step in InsurTech revolution will be focused. It's about making these sophisticated techniques available to general consumer, because historically it was very expensive, but it's not anymore. And this is hugely thanks to recent advances in InsurTech propositions. And yet, it cannot be the same as the traditional broker model, where you need to literally book an appointment with somebody and talk to somebody to go to this process. We have to use data. We have to use new sources of data, but we also need to be very open and transparent with the customer and give back the control over their data. And the numbers I showed you clearly support this view. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great day in our Insurtechireland room. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer.
Thank you for presentation, Stan. And the first question comes to mind. Actually, it's not exactly a question, but more a statement stemming from your presentation. So you understand that good handling of data, consumer-oriented handling of data, actually is even a sort of marketing tool, because it gives you a sort of edge before your competitors.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's very important to understand how to communicate with the customer about it, because again, it's not an immediate pain point for the customer. It's not the same as paying twice as much premium. So it doesn't hit them immediately that it's important, but it is actually important if you talk to them at a deeper level. And yes, if you have an insurance product which has these characteristics, this is a big selling point, because it's a reasonably difficult gap to close. So you may go ahead of your competitors at least for a while.
Yeah, I see. Okay, this is a great takeaway from your presentation, Stan. Thanks again. And I would like to give floor to the next speaker, which according to our program is Michael Crawford. Yeah, Michael Crawford. Michael, floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation to talk today. It's a pleasure to be asked, and I've been asked to talk about the future. So, first of all, first question is, who am I, and why am I talking to you? Well, I'm Michael Crawford, and I'm the CEO of an Insurtech startup called Describe Data based in Dublin. Now, I originally trained as an actuary, but I've worked in technology for my whole career. And in recent years, I've been involved in the application of things like data analytics, machine learning, and AI to the insurance industry. So I'm a geek that understands insurance, and I hope that this gives me an insight as to what's going on in the industry, but also more importantly, what's going to happen next. So we're going to have to look into the future. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we have to think about this in a very strategic way. And if you think about insurance, it's a data business, and we are now living in a data economy. And this affects every industry. It's affected the media, retail, especially over the lockdown. Education is changing. Banking has completely changed in 10 years. Transport and logistics have come on leaps and bounds, and especially in the last the last 6 months. Healthcare, technology, and even insurance. I mean, it is very much a laggard in this industry, in the data analytics and kind of machine learning and data and technology space, but it's happening. The last year of lockdown has also brought forward a huge amount of adoption in how people interact with technology and use kind of things like online retail. Statistics are saying something like 5 years predicted adoption happened in the last 6 to 12 months, which is amazing. And it looks like it's going to stick. Okay, and obviously there are going to be winners and losers in this. There are a lot of losers already. Companies that kind of sat down and, it happens to civilizations, as you can see with the Mayans, it happens to companies. Companies like Kodak, Nokia, that were on the top of their game, Tower Records, Blockbusters, which were basically just logistic businesses, did very, very well. And then all of a sudden, very, very quickly, they've gone. And it was basically more or less their own hubris and their own inability to adapt that actually killed them. So actually look at who was actually very, very successful. And all the usual suspects are here. This is just a range of Google, Netflix, Facebook, Microsoft, all those types of companies. The companies that, 10 or 20 years ago, if you asked kind of the questions of who were going to be the big company, they probably wouldn't have even come up on your radar, with the exception of someone like Microsoft. Like Facebook didn't even exist. And the weird thing is happening is that the longevity of companies is actually decreasing as well. In the last 15 years, those 50% of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. New companies have come into taking their place, and the amount of incredibly high kind of capitalizations, companies like Apple. And in 1955, the average life expectancy of a company was 75 years. So it's, companies are getting like big stars. They're getting old really, really fast. And the new ones are coming up very, very quickly. And the next generation of companies that come on from Google, Netflix, and Facebook are already, they're probably already paranoid about them. So the interesting question is, how is this going to affect insurance? And we've had a front row seat to this. And the best companies are going to have to reinvent the way that they basically they use technology and data. This happened across this is a common theme across all those companies, and that's how it's going to basically fall into insurance. Insurance companies are going to have to adopt the technology, data, and the way that they distribute products, the way that they design products as well. Everything is going to have to change. And as a big incumbent kind of industry, traditionally, it's not very good at this. And you have to if you look at something like banking, the same thing happened to them about 10 years ago when online banking started to come online. They basically dismissed it. They kind of thought, like, how do 4 or 5 guys in a room with a bit of technology, and they're not going to disrupt us. And that's exactly what's happened. Insurance is going through that moment at that kind of realization. Well, not even that realization, that denial at the moment. Certain companies are actually realizing, they're going to have to change. They're going to have to start making inroads along that line, but it's very much kind of a laggard in the financial service industry. So, and this is basically why we're seeing the rise of insurtech companies. We're seeing companies like us, very small companies, coming up, disrupting the industry and coming in with novel ideas, novel ways of doing things, novel uses of technology, novel uses of data, a combination of all those things, looking at AI, which is a very, very big, scary word I'm going to talk about later, how that is going to affect the industry. And there is almost that kind of like that cognitive dissonance from these companies, the big incumbent companies. Like literally, it's like, how has this happened? Where did all these companies come from? They seem to have come out of the ground on a lift. And these small insurtechs that are coming in and nipping away at us. There are bigger ones that are coming in. If you look at someone, if you look at companies like Zego, 3 or 4 years ago, they started off with an idea. They just got valued at just over $1 billion. Those sorts of companies are going to become more and more prevalent. Companies like Couva. I went to one of the first Insurtech London meetups where Couva presented their idea about 5 years ago. Now they're doing about 5% of the UK car insurance market, which is massive. So these companies seem to have come out of nowhere, but they haven't. They've come over. This has taken a long time. I've been involved in technology and insurance my whole career. I've worked as an actuary, since the early 90s, but I literally have been working in technology for the whole time during that time. And the reality is, there's a quote from Eddie Cantor, a very famous kind of 20s singer-songwriter, and it takes 20 years to make an overnight success. So basically, how has this happened? Where has this come from? And there are about 4 or 5 things that are going on that I think have actually changed the landscape and made the ability for companies like our company, Describe Data, to compete against the big companies and disrupt industries. And they are very, very simply ubiquitous computing, the rise of the cloud, the rise of serverless. Each of these factors is powerful in their own right, but they also kind of interact and basically kind of empower each other. And there's a kind of virtuous circle. One gets better and they all get better. So if you look at computing, it's gone from the domain of being from the very, very wealthy to a commodity. We built all our stuff on Google Cloud Platform. We can spin up very, very powerful machines, for hours at a time. It's just that computing is a commodity, and we have the sort of computing power now at our disposal, as a small company that would have only been available to nation states 10 years ago. And that is a very, very powerful kind of disrupting influence. The other thing is, it sounds very trite to say, but the internet and the protocols and technologies that allow computers to connect to each other, no matter what they're doing, has been fundamental. And what has happened is it's allowed computing and a lot of services to be built on top of that infrastructure. And that almost having a kind of a reliable network that connects computers in a very agnostic kind of way allows people to build technologies on top of that haven't been envisaged yet. And that's something we'll come to. What's possible with that network. The other thing that we use, all our software is built on free and open source software. And 10 or 15 years ago, when I mentioned this sort of thing in insurance, and especially into actuarial circles, people used to laugh me out of the room. But basically, the free and open source software has become ubiquitous. Everybody is using it. The whole internet backbone's built on it. We have built all our software on open source software, on Node, on Linux, on React, everything. And this is just going to be, the availability of that software, the functionality it has, and the availability for us to actually pick and choose world-class software that's been developed by, at scale by people is amazing. And also we're seeing the rise of data and analytics and AI. And this is something that we've seen over the last 10 years. Machine learning is slowly but surely coming out of academia. It's been a long journey. I mean, machine learning is 70 years old. I mean, it's a blend of the very old science of statistics, which is about 300 years old, with the very new science of computer science. And what happened for a long time was that theoretical progress ran ahead of the ability to actually implement it. And the rise of the internet and ubiquitous computing and free software tools have basically closed that circle. That means that there's almost an arms race going on with data analytics and AI. And again, all that software is available to everybody on the same terms, big banks and small companies and individuals. And that's a very, very powerful theme. So basically, you've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse there. They're coming in and disrupting all industries. And it's really starting to disrupt insurance. So having looked at the background of where companies like us have come from, the challenges that big companies face, and what are the themes that are going to make those changes and prosecute those changes in the future, how is this going to pan out? So where's it going, and how is it going to affect you? And I have worked, as I originally trained as an actuary, I worked in technology my whole career. After about 25 years out of the pure actuarial game, I went to work in London for a company as their head of data analytics, and they were an actuarial consultancy. And what struck me on day one when I came in was the company, that the technology and tools that they were using in 2016, which was effectively Excel and Outlook, were exactly the same tools that they were using when I left that industry to work in IT about in the mid-90s. The only thing that had changed was the version number. However, in my IT career, the only constant was change. The technology cycles are very, very quick. They incredibly change very, very quickly and embrace change very, very quickly. There were tools and techniques that I was using in the 90s, things like Visual Basic, that I literally couldn't give away now. I was actually charging, that's what I was making my living at. Now I cannot actually, you couldn't give those skills away. You constantly have to adapt, you constantly have to learn, and you constantly have to bring in new skill sets and build stuff on them. And that hasn't happened in the insurance industry. And that walking into that office using the same technology and making a very good living at it as an actuarial consultancy kind of brought it home to me as how much of a laggard the industry has been. It hasn't had to change. Unfortunately, that is not the case, but going forward. Change is coming, and companies like us are bringing that change to the industry. So how is change adopted? Well, there's a very, very kind of well accepted model called the technology adoption lifecycle. And it's a model that describes the adoption or acceptance of a new product or innovation by basically setting things into defined groups. And typically you see a slow adoption and then a rapid kind of ramp up, and then kind of a leveling off up towards 100% adoption. And if you see what's happened with things like e-commerce over the last year, what's happened is that late majority and those laggards that are indicated here, all that's been pulled forward. A lot of people that would have been very resistant to using things like the internet, buying online, the technology, have had to engage. I very much use the kind of idea of my mother started buying things from Amazon and eBay this year, whereas she never had before. She's 75, and because she had to, and she found the experience incredibly positive, and is now off and running with it. That's what you're going to see in general with how technology is adopted. Yeah, that is true for large populations, and it's true for industries. And we're seeing this in industries as well. We see it very much in insurance, that they are very much on the kind of the late majority and laggard stage of the adoption curve, which basically means a lot of adoption has been done. And what happens then is it tends to, the adoption that kind of comes and hits them almost like a tsunami, because there's a lot of that early kind of work has been done, and they get almost the tail end of it. So they get all the adoption very, very quickly, and it kind of overwhelms them. And that's what you're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years. Business models changing, where companies that had a big market literally now have a very small market, and small companies like Kuva, like Zego coming in and basically taking over those markets. So let's look at actual industries and look what's actually happening. Is these are actual adoption curves for technology over the last century. And if you look at things like television, if you look at things like radio, and you look at things like electricity, they were adopted over a 30 or 40 year period. The airplane, the telephone, the automobile, they took a long time to basically become almost 100% adoption. On the far left of the screen, though, you see things like the mobile phone, the internet, the PC. Actually almost got, the internet adoption curve for things like the smartphone happened over a period of 2 to 3 years. I remember in about 2008, 2009, when no one had a smartphone. And then by 2013, everybody had a smartphone. So the adoption curves of technology are actually getting steeper, which is basically very, very bad for the insurance industry, because, things are happening very, very quickly, and it's not great at basically dealing with that sort of thing. So, but don't worry, it actually gets a lot worse. In tech circles, there's a very famous essay by Mark Andreessen, who was one of the first people who wrote the first commercial web browser, Netscape Navigator. And he basically came out of that, set up a cloud company in the early noughties, which was before cloud was a big thing, sold that for about 1.6 billion, about 2007. And he set up a VC firm called A16Z, which has more or less been at the center of the Web 2.0. And his point was that all the internet companies that kind of came out of the initial .com boom would have worked 10 years later, because people had the smartphone technology, the internet had got better, the technology and tools had got better. Basically, they were all ideas just ahead of their time. And he wrote an essay called Software is Eating the World. What it basically says is that anything that can become software will become software. And that is bottom line, if you think about anything. So if you think about, okay, what does that really mean in real life? Now, we've connected nearly everyone on the planet. There are 5 billion adults in the world, and 4 billion of them have a smartphone. So you look at, so now everyone's connected to the internet, and we've built a lot of tools and technology on top of those computers, that machine learning, that AI and the internet. And think companies like Amazon, if you think for Amazon, it's shopping as software. Netflix, it's entertainment as software. Tinder, it's relationships to software. And in 2017, 40% of Americans met their partners online. Airbnb, it's experiences, it's holidays as software. So, you know, basically everything is going to become software. So I have a corollary to this Mark Andreessen thing, which is software will eat insurance, okay? And if you think about insurance, it's a virtual product. Think about the data it consumes. It's all in the ether. How do we turn the trust and reputation that insurance companies provide into code? This is what blockchain and distributed ledger was designed for. It disintermediates trust and allows its trust as software. What about regulation? People always use, oh, you can't get into insurance. Regulation is a huge barrier to entry. Great quote I heard of some friends of ours who said, well, payments company years ago was like, and they came from the software and said, regulation is just code. I'm used to code. I like code. So regulation is not the barrier that you think it is. So watch your step. So it's going to be a bumpy ride, you know, for insurance companies. So coming back down to earth, let's look at everyone's favorite buzzword at the moment, which is AI, which is going to have a huge effect on insurance over the next 10 years, okay? And my opinion is that we're really only at the start of the adoption curve for machine learning and AI. We're really on the far left, and a lot of work is being done in other industries. And again, it's going to actually appear into the insurance industry all at once, like it came out of the ground on a lift, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience for them. So how does the insurance industry think about AI? It tends to think about it in very unhelpful ways. It says things like data is the new oil without actually really thinking about that. And it kind of thinks about, oh, AI is going to take all my jobs, take the jobs. And that's not what it's going to do. What we do at Describe Data is that we use AI and machine learning to basically give underwriters a better idea of the risks that they're taking very, very quickly. We like to say we use AI to build the bionic underwriter. We make them better, stronger, and faster. We empower them. We basically give them the equivalent of a digger or a machine, a heavy lifting machine for data and technology. Google has all the data. People used to say things like, oh, Oracle's got all the databases. Google does have all the data, but it's a huge company. It doesn't know what to do with it. Data in itself is not a very useful thing. It's the insights that you provide from that data. That's what AI is very, very useful at, but you also need domain knowledge to do that. So we're seeing Google come into insurance at the moment, especially into the London market. They're partnering up with incumbents. They're partnering up with technology companies because they know they don't have the domain knowledge to actually prosecute what they want to do. And even calling it AI, because it's basically lots of different things. It's data analytics, it's machine learning. Pure AI, is a very relies on huge amounts of data and massive computational power at the moment. That is actually only a niche area. There are things like Bayesian statistics, which are very good at the other end, where you have an awful lot of inherent knowledge of a risk or how it's generated, but you have very little data. And we use an awful lot of that kind of thing. Okay, so a better way to think about AI. Okay, so I think about AI in almost like the new relational database. Okay, and the relational database came about in the early 80s. They saw it, probably the 70s. Oracle got started. My father actually worked for Oracle very early on in the 80s, before anyone knew what a relational database was. I remember him showing me how it worked on a toy database he built that he used to sell it, and he was selling mainly to governments and things like that. But it allowed people to do things like, show me all my customers who have this property, show me all the people in this postcode. Whereas before you couldn't do that. It was a very simple question, but it was an IT project or a serious issue to be able to get that kind of information, and allowed the way then companies to actually build very different products on top of that. So they used relational databases in ways that they weren't really intended to be used, and in the 90s and 80s. So every company almost became, they used databases to implement things like enterprise reporting software. So if you think about it, something like our Amazon, when it stored up, it basically used the relational databases on top to build kind of online shopping. SAP allowed it to build a generic enterprise reporting software, which meant you could do things like move your supply chain to China. Starbucks, think of Starbucks as a database company, but you couldn't do the logistics without that kind of technology underlying it. GlaxoSmithKline, a huge, you've heard an awful lot of them in the last month. They're basically using, they're using databases and technology on top of that, and they've built an awful lot of software on top of kind of relational databases to enable them to do their business and basically do their business globally and do it more efficiently. They never really thought about that when relational databases first started out. However, if you think about that's what AI is. It enables you to build stuff on top of that. It enables you, okay? So it enables you to build tools and techniques on top of which allows you to ask questions of your data that you couldn't ask before. Like, show me the people that had these type of accidents. Is this pattern, something that's significant, and can I profit from it? Is this behavior fraudulent? I can interpret and ask questions about images now. Like, show me an image, and how much does the damage to this car approximately going to cost to fix in this country? Looking from an image. So basically, finding patterns becomes generalizable, and those sorts of tools are very simple. There's just one area that we can apply AI to. What you're going to see is people always kind of think about, oh, we're going to build these robots and they're going to take over and they're going to do all my jobs. What you're seeing is that AI is being used to build the equivalent of washing machines. Do the Unix tool. They do one thing and they do it really, really well. And they're basically efficiency generators. So you can actually, if you think about it, there are lots of things that you can do with AI. And almost like a relational database that you can start saying, well, how can I use that tools and technology? And you think about insurance, it's the poster child for that. There's lots of data out there in the ether that's not being used. We can find correlations. We can use it to build new products. And there are probably people sitting in their bedrooms now coding away, building tools that are going to, and ideas that are going to have massive impact in the insurance industry over the next 10 years. I just don't know where they are or exactly what they are, but they are out there, and it's going to happen because the tools and techniques are free, the software is free, high-powered computing is ubiquitous and practically free. The internet will connect everyone together so we can all collaborate very, very easily. Data analytics is going. So the common theme here is that the tools and techniques and the computing power that is now available to everyone on AI is going to basically mean there's going to be a free-for-all out there, almost like a zombie apocalypse of ideas that are going to hit all industries. And my premise is it's going to hit insurance very, very hard, mainly because it's a late adopter and it's not prepared. And it's going to look like a tsunami to them. Okay, so how does this work? Well, with insurance, if you think about what you can do with 10,000 interns, that will be a very interesting thing. Or 1 million or 10 million. It doesn't really matter, because we're using AI as an agent to look at data or interpret patterns and stuff like that. It's infinitely scalable, and the costs are coming down, exponentially every 18 months. So let's look at some common examples, and these are quite old in terms of but now machines can read at the level of a probably 12 to 15-year-old. So if you can think about what you could do with 1 million 15-year-olds going through policy documentation, going through claims data, looking for connections between types of claims and fraud, that sort of thing. Really, really interesting. JP Morgan have done a lot of this sort of stuff where they've actually used it to look at due diligence documentation. So they can actually now read NLP, using NLP, they can, and natural language processing and AI, they can actually read documentation very, very quickly. We can actually start looking at the actual language people use on things like earnings calls for companies. Very interesting from insurance companies. How are companies run? What are we do an awful lot of work with directors and officers in insurance. How a company is run, and the tool and the way that the people who are responsible for the company talk can have a very big meaning. The language that they use can actually have a good pointer to how the company is run and what its likely prospects are. Really, really simple stuff. Very, very hard to do 10 years ago. Now almost trivial to do. And we couldn't finish off this talk without looking at Brit Insurance. They took a very, very kind of simple, kind of almost like 10,000 million intern approach to looking at policy documentation, and that's what they've done. They've built almost an online mechanical Turk AI machine to look at almost pile on high syndicated risks. And they've done it really, really well, and they're basically building out on that. But that's how it starts, and the amount of people that we've talked to over the last year, when we go in and talk about AI and data analytics, the companies that we're either talking to or trying to sell to, this is one thing that Key and Brit Insurance and what they've done comes up all the time. Everyone's fascinated by it. Everyone's a little bit frightened by it. So they're all going to try and slowly get in on the act on it. So, and fundamentally, this is what we're doing. We're building the bionic underwriter of the future. We're using new tools, new data sources, AI, machine learning to basically give underwriters a superior understanding of risk and then just get out of their way. We're building that, that washing machine rather than the robot. We're giving the underwriters using massive amounts of data where we can plug into, say, 70,000 news sources and say, right, show me all the news about, AT&T. I've got our underwriter D&O tower for them, and I really want to know what's going on in the media, what are the themes in the communication sector. And I can basically read 1 million documents at scale in 10 minutes and get an idea as to what's going on in that sector, why AT&T is a good bet or a bad bet. Likewise, we can do the same with all the corporate information that's coming out on the company. We can do the same, and we can look at that across a portfolio. It's an incredibly exciting time to be involved in InsurTech, because you have the tools and techniques and the data out there, and they're available to companies like us. And I think it must be quite a frightening time, no matter what you hear or what companies say, to be on the inside of those companies, because they know we're coming. And what's happened is the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. The Stone Age ended because basically it turned into the Bronze Age. We figured out how to work with iron, how to work with copper and tin, and things changed very, very quickly for the people. And the people on the wrong end of that were basically are now an archaeological exhibit somewhere. And that's my talk. I'm going to leave the slides up. It's on insurtechbalkans.describedata.com. If you go there, all the slides are there. They're online. There's a link to the PDF version of the slides there. Please, help yourself. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you. It was really, really fascinating presentation, especially the monkey part at the end.
I'll put it back then for you. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, your presentation somehow reminded me a quote by Peter Drucker, one of the fathers of the modern management, that eventually any product becomes a commodity or some kind of raw material. And having this in mind, and having in mind that commodities tend to deteriorate over time, how data could be how the data scientist could deal with the dirty data, with the data that is not compliant to any standards. I mean, the data that has been developed for the last 20, 30 years, and it's quite unusable for the moment.
Yeah, I'll take that. One observation on your quote there. If you look at someone like Anthemis, we have quite a bit of dealings with Anthemis, who are a VC. They are they're kind of putting huge amounts of money behind embedded insurance. So they've invested in companies like Hokodo, which basically provide invoice insurance at the point of when you get an invoice in, and they'll do it like via an API, so you can embed it into your systems. So that is almost insurance as a commodity, as part of a supply chain. You're going to see a lot more of that. And on the daily data side, I mean, one of the things we do, Mick Cooney, our CTO, is an absolute expert at, is actually pulling in, a massive amounts of data that is unstructured, and putting some kind of, using AI and using kind of tools and techniques to put a lens over that, to actually and extract insights out of it. One of the projects before we settled on working on directors and officers insurance is we looked at cyber insurance. And the one thing about cyber insurance is there is no actuarial data out there. So as an actuary, you're in the same position as actuaries were in the 1700s in the UK, where you're going to have to go around graveyards and churchyards and hospitals trying to find out how many people died of what and when and how old they were. You're having to build your own data set. And we did that. We went out and scraped the internet for various sources and got a lot of unstructured data on breaches and people discussing breaches, and use that data to build a reference model of how frequent and the frequency and severity for cyber breaches going back. So you can actually do that. And the weird thing is that we were three at the time. This was before we'd set up Described Data. We were only 3 people, using open source software, using AWS to do that, and we could do it. Whereas before, you couldn't do that. So you're going to see a lot more companies coming in using what you would have thought of as intractable data or messy data to build tools and techniques and products that are going to change the insurance industry.
Yeah, hopefully there will be also standards about those products. Cross fingers.
Yeah, I think you will find that, but I think you'll also find that, again, it will be a survival of the fittest. Some of them will become standards. And the standards will be set by the companies that are successful, which is generally the way things happen.
Yeah, I understand your point. Okay, thank you again for your great presentation. And I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, who is Aravind Ravi. Hi. Sorry, you cannot see me, I'm afraid.
That's okay, that's okay.
You just try to share your screen. Well,
you have it.
Up and running.
Yeah.
So
first, all right, so thanks so much for getting me here today. And special thanks to Michael for painting the picture of what the insurance apocalypse is going to look like. And pretty much my presentation is going to be an extension from there on. exploring the area of usage-based insurance in an excruciating detail and bring this apocalypse to life as Michael had described there. So my name is Arvind, and I am the CEO of Insurely, and Insurely is a startup which is a platform as a service. It's a digital enabler for insurance companies. And over the last 10 months or so, we've been working on building out our usage-based insurance platform. So we are the actual solution to the apocalypse that the insurance companies are going to have. So that said, for today's discussion, what I want to do is I want to explore why and how mobility industry is being transformed and how that is a big problem for the insurance industry in the way it currently operates. And I'm going to briefly touch upon the concept of induced travel, and then I'm probably going to show a short little demo of what Insurely has made possible, and in general, how technology can solve this problem, and we'll leave it at that at the point. So before we go into that, it's important to acknowledge how the insurance industry operates, especially from a motor perspective, right? So all of us are drivers, are risks. We are being classified based on certain factors, right? And we are rated and modeled after using statistical models and using the claims data, right? So these are not real-time processes. These are data that has been captured and accumulated over decades. And we are just using, the insurance companies are just using them to categorize us and then rate us. And there is definitely a general understanding of the heterogeneity and the randomness of this whole risk in motor insurance, because road risk is something that is not fully predictable. It is so unpredictable and random. And there is some level of understanding, and that's why most of the prices are very, very, very close to one another. So that's the way the industry operates in general. It's not real time. It's very rudimentary in its approach, and it uses statistical models to perform this task. And that's why it's going to be such a big difficulty with all the disruption that is happening in the mobility industry. So with that said, let's see what's happening in the mobility industry. Why should insurers be alarmed, and why should the industry in general be alarmed about this whole idea? Before we go into that, let's look at what they are trying to transform. Right, they are trying to solve this problem of inefficient infrastructures that we have built over hundreds of years now. It's traffic congestion. So there's a sample data there right in front of you. Between 2010 and 2016, there was a drastic increase in traffic congestion in major cities across the world. And I think the trend has only kept increasing with the increase in newer services that are being offered. But that isn't a gist of where these mobility services saw themselves as a solution, right? So they wanted to solve this problem of inefficiencies in infrastructures that we had in the present day. So they set out theories that they wanted to achieve. They are almost guided by these theories at this point in time as they operate. They want to create cleaner, convenient, and efficient solutions to travel in an objective sense. That is about increasing the traffic volumes. When I say traffic, it's movement of people. It's you and I and our goods, the travel of them. So the increasing in the traffic, but still cutting off the travel time by Y%. And it's enough for insurers to be alarmed at this point, because you're now increasing the traffic and you're reducing the time, which is like you're actually traveling faster in the same infrastructure, and while there's more traffic in there. So there's alarm enough over there. But then they're also trying to reduce emissions. They're trying to bring in electric vehicles, which insurers have no knowledge about. All of their knowledge is coming off of internal combustion vehicles. So that is what the mobility solution is in general trying to achieve. But then they're also taking a very segmented approach. There is no one size fits all approach, right? So there's no way you can really scoot from your home to your office if your office and home is more than 5 kilometers. I've tried to do that, doesn't work. Don't do it again. So the segmented approach means there are problems that are addressed at a city level. Then there are problems that are addressed at a suburban level, transit mobility solutions. And then there are problems that are addressed at a long haul level, like automated vehicles and so on and so forth. And then they also work with a very growth mindset, the mobility solutions. They are designed to operate with extreme efficiency in terms of customer acquisition. They go the extra mile and take a loss in order to acquire customers, because that is their KPI that they want to achieve. And they're also reducing the churn in that whole process. And they make sure the customer acquisition and churn are inversely proportional. What this means for the insurers is that these mobility solutions are here to stay, and they are here to make an impact, and they're making an impact by a large margin, right? They are essentially changing the behaviors of us as drivers and as users, and that is a big problem that insurers have to address, because when behaviors change, the risk associated with these behaviors change as well. So with that said, let's take a look at how complex this whole landscape of risk has gotten. Now, I'm going to take a very rudimentary approach. I'm going to try and put a number to this whole complexity of risk, right? So try to follow on with me. So I told you earlier on that there's a segmented approach that the mobility market takes. So there's this 0 to 2 kilometer segment, and then there's 2 to 10 kilometer segment, 10 plus kilometer segment. So everything in the 0 to 2 kilometer segment would be the ones like that of your e-commerce last mile delivery solutions, the Deliveroos of this world, and to some extent the electric scooters and those kind of intercity stuff that we're talking about, intracity stuff that we're talking about. And then you have the 2 to 10 kilometer problems. These are the commute level problems. How do you efficiently commute from your suburb home into your office, which is probably inside the city, and back, which you're not doing now, but that's what the mobility market is trying to address. And this is where solutions like pooling, carpooling, car sharing, and ride sharing, and all these come in. And the 10 plus kilometer segment, this is where we talk about the long haul travels. And I personally feel the automated vehicles are going to make an important mark in this level of the mobility industry first, before they transition to the rest of the industry. And I think they're already making huge strides in long haul travels as we speak. So that paints a picture of the segmented approach the mobility market is taking. And you would have probably understood the trend that it's taking. Each of these segments are different in the way they look at their solutions, and they are different risks essentially. A scooter and an automated vehicle, there are two different risks we're talking about, and both of them essentially fall under the motor business. Now let's add a little bit more complexity to this discussion, and let's talk about the measures of performance that these companies have when it comes to their internal performance or their growth strategies. As I told you about earlier, the XYZs are so important to them. If I go back to that slide, they want to make the traffic, they want to have more traffic on the road, cut the travel time, but reduce emissions. So that's your XYZs, your measures of performance. Here, essentially, they are trying to incorporate newer technologies in order to achieve this, newer methods of transporting people in order to achieve this. And that essentially adds another layer of risk and another perspective of risk. And as mobility solutions are driving themselves towards achieving this so aggressively, that we can only imagine how different the risk of someone who is just owning a car and driving in and out of the city would look like compared to a mobility solutions provider. And then now let's add another level of complexity in the available solutions that these mobility solutions can tap into. So there are IVs and EVs. IVs, I think, are going to be skeletons pretty soon, but there are IVs and EVs as we speak, and there's going to be a shared ecosystem for a few years to come. So the internal combustion vehicles and the electric vehicles. And then there is the difference between personal pooling and car sharing. Three of them, three different categories of risk. All of them can be handled differently and have to have different rating systems. And then you have the hiring of a vehicle and then the hailing of the vehicle. Either do you want to, is that a weekend that you want to drive and you just want to hire a car to do that and you drive yourself. And then there's the hailing solutions in place, which is something like Uber. And then adding another level of complexity is automation, semi-automation, and manual level vehicles. And at this point, I'd like to stop, right? I can keep adding more complexities to the whole aspect of risk. But I want to stop at this point. We've probably discussed about 16 different types of different metrics that these mobility solutions are going after, and 16 of them are different types of risks. So if you want to do a simple permutation, let's say we want to pick out an arbitrary mobility solution that incorporates 3 of these 16 segments, or 3 of these 16 points we have discussed, and you want to create a solution. So you can actually arrive at 3,360 different types of mobility solutions. Now you can. Now all of them can coexist in the same ecosystem, can coexist in the same jurisdiction of insurance, and that is going to be a huge problem for insurers, because it's virtually impossible to create 3,360 rating systems for 3,360 risks. And I'm taking a very rudimentary approach here, right? The real number can be really high. I'm just trying to establish the complexity that the mobility solutions and the technologies that are coming in are creating in this ecosystem as we speak. And then now I want to talk a little bit about the concept of induced travel. And it's one of the things that is favorite to all of us right now. We're all talking about COVID and the effects of COVID on all these businesses at this point, right? Induced travel is nothing but how the behavior of a user or a person changes depending on the availability of a new service or the efficiency of a new service. So if the price of a particular service, let's say a ride-sharing solution, goes down, the adoption increases, so the demand for it increases. And because these solutions are built to reduce churn, these behavioral changes stick on for a longer time and eventually transition to most of the market, if not all of the market. And these changes happen typically at a route level, the routes that they are taking to travel every day. They might change, the modes of travel are changing, the time taken for a travel is definitely changing. So your traffic volumes are drastically different now from what it used to be 5 years ago. And then the generation of new trips. So you're traveling a lot more than you used to because these services have become cheaper. And there are more statistical information that shows how increase in intercity traffic or intracity traffic has taken place because of an introduction of electric scooters. So that is the concept of induced travel and how COVID has played into this whole induced travel. And I want to pick out the 2 important influences of this induced travel, e-commerce and COVID. E-commerce has been creating induced travel for a long time now, but COVID has just accelerated that whole process. So this number, this information that you're seeing right now is very, very important, very interesting to me as a person, because what you can see is Latin America is creating more adoption. So in markets where you do not have penetration of technologies like telematics are evidently creating more change than the markets you have more foothold in, and that is going to be a huge problem, isn't it, for insurers? So how do you solve this problem? And I think Michael touched upon a little bit of the solutions and how data and how AI can be of help, and Insurely is essentially trying to build one of these solutions for traditional insurers to adopt. So the key features of any of the solution that you want to have to address this problem that we are talking about here, it has to be able to evaluate risk in real time. A telematics-based solution has to be in place, right? And but then the problem of telematics comes in when there's no large-scale adoption of telematics, right? And that's probably coming down the line as well. And then there has to be some element of dynamic pricing. Okay, so now you've evaluated the risk and you know the risk you're doing. How do you mitigate it, right? You need to dynamically price the insurance so that the customer, the consumer, is informed of the increase or decrease in risk, and in that way you can influence the behavior of the user. And this goes back to saying how the behavior of the drivers and the users are changing because of the mobility solutions, and how and the dynamic pricing is the way you address this problem straight away. You price based on the risk in real time. You can expect some amount of risk mitigation to be happening there. And then it's so important to be source agnostic. I think telematics, the large scale adoption of telematics did not happen because of the lack of not being source agnostic. when I say source agnostic, you should be able to ingest information from various different types of data sources. So, for example, Insurely is defined to or designed to ingest data from smartphones to black box solutions to Android Auto and Apple CarPlay kinds of things, and any other data. We're essentially a data engine which ingests information and then provides the underwriting engines thereon with. So it's important to be source agnostic. Otherwise, we cannot look at mass adoption, and thereby we cannot make a lot of impact in there because of the lack of data. And the second most important thing is the importance of use of alternative data. The data that we capture from the end user, that's great, right? That gives us the information about the behavior of the users. But then when you look at road collisions in general, they are more so occur, or they're more so caused by external factors. And it's so important, and it's to be consuming this alternative data from different data sources, either be it weather engines, the traffic volumes information, so on and so forth. And Surely is designed to even ingest data from satellite imagery. We look at, and we have different redundant levels of data in order to back up that information we get from satellite feed. And we also, and it's very important to do all of this stuff at the cheapest price possible. And it's definitely possible to do that because of the influx of cloud solutions and the cost of cloud being extremely low at this point. With that said, I'd like to give a visual representation of what I've been talking about and what the solution would look like, right? And so any insurer that looks to enter into this market has to have a principle around what is the metric against which the pricing is going to happen. Is it against the distance that is covered or the amount of time on road? And we're taking a standpoint that we're saying it's actually a factor of both, right? Because the time that you spend on road and the distance that is driven on road is not always proportional. They are completely random, and you can spend a lot more time on the road in a traffic congested environment, but you can spend very little time on the road but spend longer distance. So the pricing has to be a factor of both, and that's what we've taken into account here. And let me very quickly log into the system. So what you see here is a simulated environment wherein we are trying to simulate a journey, and then we are trying to see how we can put the data that we are extracting from the user as well as from alternative data sources and how we're using it for how we're factoring all of this into the pricing component. So let's quickly go ahead and create a simulated journey from a point A to B somewhere in Ireland. Right. So as the driver starts driving around, the information that we get from the client side of things is obviously their lat long, and based on this information, you can calculate the distance, the time that is taken for the journey, and obviously the speed at which they are traveling, and a lot more information. We can also include the accelerometer and gyroscopic data, which is basically going to tell us the impact that the user is having. It can tell a lot about the braking quality. It can tell a lot about acceleration of the driver, and so on and so forth. And then we are going outside and we are enriching our models with alternative data. We are looking at environmental factors. We're looking at cloud cover, which country, when did the sun rise on that particular day, which would define the lighting condition at that time. And then we are looking at temperature, we're looking at wind speed. My CTO joked recently that if we were to implement this system in Ever Given, maybe the ship would not have crashed in the Suez Canal. But that's the level of sophistication. We are extracting the data from alternative sources, and we are enriching that into the model in order to perform the live pricing. Also getting data about the surface of the road, which is quite important. What kind of road is it? If you can see here, it's an asphalt, and it's a one-way. And these sort of information are entered into the model for, and these are the information with which the model is actually performing instead of the historic statistical models that we used to perform. And then with this information, we are evaluating the probability of accident. How likely are you to be in an accident? And this is information that would have not been possible without the use of alternative data and artificial intelligence. And then we try to evaluate the risk in real time. And over this presentation, you might have seen the risk is gone from high to low to medium, depending on the behavior of the user and the road that they are taking in. And all of this information is used to create a risk score, which is factored into the pricing, along with the rating that was taken for the rate per kilometer and minute. And what I'd like to establish with that is the opportunities that we have, the amount of information we can get with the technologies that are presently available to us as insurtechs in order to disrupt the way we evaluate risk, and we offer new solutions and we personalize these solutions. And that is why investing in UBI is so important and so critical right now, because the mobility solutions have been disrupting this environment, making the models and the way the rating systems operated obsolete more and more. And COVID has changed this landscape and accelerated this whole process by a large margin. If not for COVID, maybe another 5 years. But because of COVID, we got to act right now. And if that's not information enough, we have the whole industry trending towards it. We are just one of the many startups that is working in the UBI industry, and not many are insurer friendly like us. We are a digital enabler for insurance companies, but then there are disruptors who are competitive, who are taking a competitive stance and are enabling these solutions themselves by having capacity from underwriters, more modern underwriters. And I think with that, I'd like to bring a close to this presentation. I think I have made my case. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Arvind. It was quite interesting, although I was not able to follow it exactly because it was pretty much technical, but I believe that the people with technical background would very much benefit of your presentation. I am just wondering, since on your presentation you were using something similar to iPhone, does it depend on a top-of-the-shelf products for gathering data? Or, for example, if I use mobile phone that is created somewhere in Asia with a little bit trimmed off Android system, it will be the same result.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw there was a simulation of an iPhone. It is not an actual iPhone. So that's what I spoke about being data agnostic. The data can come from anywhere, and our technologies should be able to handle and be agnostic and be able to handle any source of information.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you again. And before giving the floor, I just want to announce that your module will be finished by another colleague of mine because I have to enter in another module. But now I take the opportunity to give the floor to John Byrne. Okay.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, everybody.
Hi. Hello. Could you just share your screen now?
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Thank you. Just put it in a full screen mode.
There we go.
Okay.
So good morning, everybody. Quick presentation from me today. My company is Cyber Plus Solutions, and we seek to offer peace of mind from cyber risk. So a little bit about me, just as we start. Financial risk assessment is my background. In 2010, I was Chief Risk Officer of an insurance business at Lloyd's, co-founder of that business. And I've had personal exposure of cyber, which is the topic I'm going to talk about today, from having, my personal email account hacked at one stage. In 2015, I exited the Lloyd's business, and I'm currently co-founder of this insurtech firm, offering cyber risk management platform to medium-sized companies. But I'm also interested in small companies, and so I've offered an online education course for small business owners. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I have to begin by talking about the environment, because there's no point in talking about cyber insurance if we don't know what cyber is in the first place and why it's important. Then I'm going to talk about the insurance market, the opportunities that I see for insurtechs, the challenges that I see for insurtechs in this area, some of the business models that are prominent, a little bit about the future and just draw some conclusions. So I hope this will be interesting for you. So let's begin with the environment and ask the obvious question, does cyber risk matter in 2021? Well, I think all of the evidence would indicate, yes, it does matter. The World Economic Forum has always had cyber risk as a top 5 risk globally, and the UK participants always rated it as number 1. Global cybercrime is projected at about 6 trillion this year. It's doubled since 2015 and going to 10.5 trillion by 2025. And just to put those enormous numbers in context, if cybercrime was a country, it would be the 13th largest country in the world based on GDP. It's also the most profitable criminal activity in the world. And all of the surveys indicate that corporate level or C-level respondents think that their companies are not adequately protected against cyber threats, 81% in that Munich Re survey. Also, Allianz had a survey saying that 70% plus was the increase in and the average cost of cybercrime to organizations over the 5 years to 2019 to an average of $13 million. And there'd been a dramatic increase in the average number of security breaches. Now, remember, this is the period prior to COVID. This is up to 2019, and it has only got worse since then. Next question is, why is this happening? And there's a very good reason, and it's because of the environment. Our environment is constantly evolving. You've heard it from the other speakers this morning. And as the environment evolves, so do the risks and so do the loss scenarios. We can all remember the global cyber attacks of 2017 of WannaCry and NotPetya, and they were followed in 2018 by mega data breaches and only very recently COVID-19 in 2020. Most of our change is driven by digital transformation, and we do live in that hyper-connected world where we're all part of somebody else's supply chain. Every business is connected to other businesses, and business interruption in one business turns into business interruption very quickly elsewhere. COVID-19 has been mentioned by other speakers, but in my talk in cyber risk, it is the biggest digital transformation officer in the world. What actually happened was companies had to transform dramatically from the office environment to working from home, almost without any preparation. So the pace of change, which we were already seeing in our world with personal devices being used for business, with cloud computing, with the Internet of Things, that pace of change just dramatically increased in 2021 and 2020. And this idea of a secure perimeter, which is what we based all our IT defenses on up to about 10 years ago, has become a thing of the past effectively, because every company has an expanding digital estate and multiple attack vectors. That means multiple ways that the business can be attacked. Whereas in the past, it might have been primarily by email. Now we have instant messages, we have social media, we have all forms of vectors where we can be attacked. And so the risk surface of companies grows exponentially. Added to that, we've got the growing sophistication and the growing volume of advanced threats, so no longer simple threats. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, continuing data breaches, and even nation state attacks. And all of these have increased in sophistication and in volume. And sadly, the conclusion that most people come to is that the attackers are ahead of the defenders. It's worth noting the average time to detect a breach is 280 days currently. That's over 9 months. So 9 months, your attacker has been in your network, in your system, waiting for the best moment for them to attack you. And when they do attack, the average life cycle of a cyber incident is 11 months. So that's your entire management team tied up for a year, basically trying to deal with this. So bringing things right up to date to 2021, what's happening now? Well, I've already mentioned, we have experienced a dramatic restructuring of all corporate activities in the last 12 months. And all of it was done with little or no planning. Security was put pretty much to the back as concerns about just keeping going and keeping the lights on took precedence. But that created the opportunity for cyber criminals to gain access to our systems and data because we had people working from remote locations who weren't used to working in that environment. And as a result, the frequency and severity of cyber losses and cyber claims have increased dramatically, driven by a dramatic increase in malware and ransomware incidents that were reported in 2020. Small and medium-sized businesses are widely targeted in the last 2 years. And why? Because they have fewer security capabilities. They're less well prepared for this sort of attack. And the conclusion is that businesses are more vulnerable now than ever before. If the picture was dangerous before COVID, it's even more so now. The conclusions I draw are that particularly small and medium-sized businesses are highly exposed. They will inevitably have a cyber incident of some sort. When it happens, it will put the reputation, the customers, and the partners of that business at high risk. And so the response to this really is to start looking at your key information assets, start looking at the threats, the vulnerabilities that you have, and to try to put some quantum around your risk. And the objective of all businesses should be resilience through risk management, because there is no perfect solution to cyber. So number 2 on our topics is the insurance market. Now that you understand the environment, what's insurance doing? Well, we currently have an estimated $7 billion industry going to 20 billion by 2025. And that's quadrupled since 2018, according to Munich Re. The geography, though, is heavily focused on North America with 5.3 billion. Europe, supposedly more than $1 billion in insurance premium, and the rest of the world about 700 million, with Europe and Asia expected to grow quickly. The segments really cover everything: enterprise, medium, small, micro, and even personal. But most of the money is spent in the enterprise segment. And it's driven obviously by media reports and strict regulatory requirements. In some cases, business partners are pushing the requirement down to smaller businesses, and greater awareness and demand is being created for insurance and for prevention. Almost every sector is being hit by cyber losses, but the dramatic increase in 2020 and 2021 was shown in healthcare, in professional services, retail, manufacturing, government, IT, the IT industry itself, and financial services. But really, this list can go much further. So in spite of all of this growth and all of these impressive numbers, you might be surprised to hear that in the UK, the take-up rate generally for this product is still only about 10%. There are many, many potential customers who are simply unaware of the insurance benefits that cyber insurance offers, and the brokers are struggling to convince their customers to buy. It's not for lack of offers. Cyber insurance is sold by insurers, by MGAs, and by brokers. And it's not for lack of losses, because the claims experience is deteriorating. It has deteriorated in 2019 and 2020, largely caused by ransomware losses and the associated business interruption losses. And this exploitation of vulnerabilities from remote working has only added to that in 20 and 21. So really what we're talking about in the insurance market is a market in transition. A lot of growth has been achieved, but now we've got a lot of losses. And so we need to transition to the next phase. Might be useful to look back at where this product came from. Lots of people think of cyber as something new, but actually it's been around for at least 20 years. Maybe more like 30 years. And it started with the tech, media, and telecom segment and professional indemnity insurance. The TMT industries knew they had exposures that we now call cyber, but they were probably the only ones focused on it 30 years ago. There has always been silent cyber cover in property and general liability policies simply because it was not excluded. But it's interesting to note that Lloyd's in particular are now insisting on an affirmative declaration or an exclusion in these policies. Also, there were add-on endorsements offered in other policies, but they generally had limited cover. When I talk about cyber insurance, I'm really talking about standalone cyber. So that's a comprehensive cover and lots of added services, which can be pre-incident or post-incident. Generally, it's very broad cover. In fact, to the degree that it was really pushing the limits of insurability prior to the recent increase in losses, mainly in the areas of business interruption, contingent business interruption, and fraud covers. What we're seeing now is a reaction to the losses. So we've got narrowing cover, co-insurance in some places, some sublimits being imposed, extra conditions, some restrictions, as the market reacts to losses, as we always do. And we have had standardization of some covers for the smaller accounts, but it's still very difficult to compare one policy to the next. There is a quote shown at the bottom of the screen here: cyber could be the widowmaker for the insurance industry. And that's a reaction to, you know, the exposures and the losses that are there. Now, no talk about this topic could be complete without talking about the cybersecurity industry. And this is the industry outside of insurance, really. They've had a massive rise in global IT investment in cybersecurity, and it's been going on over many, many years. Cybersecurity is a $400 billion industry by 2025, and it has quadrupled since 2015. But there is a worldwide cyber skills gap, and it's worth noting. It's about 4 million open jobs in this area worldwide. We simply don't have enough skilled people. The cybersecurity industry also is enterprise focused, mainly big companies with big budgets and informed buyers. And they offer consulting, software, hardware, services, and now we're coming into insurance being offered as part of this industry or at the edges of this industry. However, it does really operate independent of us. So we have two very large industries serving the same customer from two completely different perspectives. And the question is, could we cooperate better? Because the internal response skills to an incident at our client companies are not adequate, I would argue we have to cooperate better if we genuinely want to serve the customer. So let's talk about InsurTech opportunities now. There are definitely opportunities in cyber for InsurTechs, and it is because this has become increasingly important for boards of directors. It is a hybrid working environment that we work in now and that we're likely to work in for some time to come. And it requires cybersecurity to realign with the business model. If you think about it, every business has a new business model since COVID became a reality. And so cybersecurity can't go on the way it's always been. It needs to realign to the new business model. Enterprise, mid-market, SME, and personal segments, they're all growing, and they will grow, and they will need better solutions in the future than we offer now. So this low take-up rate I mentioned before, generally across the board at 10%, has to be addressed. This is a big opportunity for InsurTechs, in my view. Customer and broker education and training is key. We can't make brokers into trusted advisors on cyber risk if they don't understand the topic. And this is a threat also to brokers, because the FCA in the UK has been saying, as a result of the business interruption scandal, if you like to call it that, recently, where lots of claims were denied, that brokers have a responsibility to ensure their customers understand what they're buying and what they're not buying. So cyber is both a threat and an opportunity for brokers. But we do need service-led products. We need more than insurance. We need insurance and security services, and potentially the merging of both into one service-driven solution. And going back to the loss picture, better underwriting is a prerequisite to a sustainable market. If we don't have a sustainable insurance market, we have nothing to offer. So better underwriting is absolutely a prerequisite to that. And there is strong funding available for InsurTechs, we've seen. These are all opportunities, and there has been a lot of progress with InsurTechs. So generally speaking, InsurTechs raised over $7 billion in 2020. A large amount of that money was by US InsurTechs. In the first quarter of 21, 2.55 billion was raised by InsurTechs, and that was a quarterly record from the Willis Towers Watson report. There were 8 mega rounds in that, totaling over $1 billion, and 2 of those mega rounds were cyber-focused companies. So one, the coalition, is already a unicorn at 1.75 billion valuation, and the second, Corvus, is quickly approaching a unicorn status. Interesting to note that there's geographically diverse companies in the InsurTech funding in the first quarter, very, very diverse. And that most of these InsurTechs are partnering with insurers, either as MGAs where they're focused on distribution, or as technical service providers, where they're more in the nature of suppliers. And because we're talking about partnering with insurers, we're talking about capacity, strategic partnerships, or potentially shareholding. So what about the challenges? No picture's complete without the other side of the coin. There are many, many challenges for insurtechs. The first one is this cyber skills gap. As I said, 4 million jobs globally open. And that means that we have low technical knowledge in insurance because we have not attracted enough of these people. They're much sought after. We also have low customer awareness of cyber risk in the first place before we talk about insurance, and poor understanding of the benefits of cyber insurance. In order to move forward, we also need to improve that meaningful IT industry, cyber IT and cyber insurance industry cooperation. These are challenges. And really, we need to add real value for customers by explaining the risk, by quantifying it, by showing how aggregation of a supply chain risk could work, and by explaining the pricing. These are further challenges for insurtechs. And you've got to acknowledge that there is either competition from insurers and traditional MGAs also, because a lot of the people who are providing these policies are traditional insurers or MGAs. The last 2 points I make on challenges are flexibility of incumbents to accept a better solution, by which I mean convincing somebody that you have a better mousetrap than they do is always a challenge. And insurtechs who seek to compete with insurers will have that problem. And there is no doubt a regulatory hurdle for insurtechs. The quote shown on the screen, I think, is a very good one. This is where we're reminded with this quote that, you know, the technology being used by insurtechs is the least interesting part for the buyer, for the customer. And unfortunately, a failure to understand that reality, in addition to, you know, the general problems of entering our industry as a nascent company, in other words, as a startup, means that most insurtechs will most likely never see the grandeur of their aspirations. I personally believe that that's true. And so it needs a good strategy to move forward. So what are the insurtech business models that we've seen? Basically 2 types. This is oversimplification, but I think it's helpful. First of all, we have the supplier insurtechs who are serving the insurance industry. That is reinsurers, insurers, MGAs, or brokers. And generally they're providing software, you know, forensics, data and analytics, pre-breach consultancy services, or training. They could be focused on underwriting, pricing, claims handling, risk modeling, or aggregation. Could be pre-incident or post-incidents. And there are many, many companies that would meet this description. I've just listed a number of them here. The definition of insurtech is very broad. So it could include companies like this, or it could include many, many others. The second type of insurtech is a distribution insurtech, which is trying to serve the end customer. And Stan mentioned this in his talk earlier about insurtechs having to make this decision about who are they actually trying to help. The distribution insurtechs are mainly SME focused, and they are mainly established as MGAs, and they will partner with insurers and reinsurers, at least from a capacity point of view. Generally, they have some form of platform, and it provides a risk management solution with insurance. So we're combining both. And the examples of this type of insurtech in cyber would include Coalition, as I mentioned earlier, Corvus, as I mentioned earlier, Zaguro, another US company, and Cowbell Cyber. These are all established as MGAs and are all cyber insurtechs, some of whom already have achieved significant valuations. So my own company, our approach is to note that cyber is a business critical risk. It's not just an IT risk. People are a huge factor. In fact, up to 90% of the risk is from people, either through error or through lack of training. Current approaches don't meet the customer's need adequately. If they did, we wouldn't be looking at 10% take-up rate. Insurance is part of the solution, it's not all of the solution. And risk selection is key to profitable underwriting. And risk selection requires cybersecurity skills, which are in short supply. So we believe that our interests should be aligned with the customer's interests. This is a simple illustration of our approach. We have a risk assessment process where we look at technology risk, people risk, and governance risk. We pull in data through API into our platform, where we create scores for the individual 3 pillars, a score called a composite score for the overall cyber score. And we produce a cyber risk report or board report, as well as a cyber insurance offer. So our software produces a dashboard, some get well plans to actually help the customer reduce risk. And of course, there's an expert incident response panel, usually arranged through insurance. So what's the future for insurtechs? Well, these are the strategic issues that every insurtech will need to decide if they're in the cyber area. And the first question is, are you cooperating or are you competing with incumbents? Second, are you following the distribution insurtech MGA model, or are you following the service provider or supplier model? Third key question is, are you technology driven or are you insurance driven? And being reminded here of the quote we read out on the last slide, technology is absolutely fantastic, but it has to produce the result that the customer is looking for. It's not all about the technology, it's about the result. Fourth question is, are you seeking to be regulated or unregulated? And that's a big issue because regulated industries, as we all know, involves a lot more stricture. It's not easy to do things quickly. It's not easy to try things and see if they work. A regulated industry brings a lot of responsibility, and it's not easy to get started in a hurry. The next one would be, are we serving the insurance industry or are we serving the ultimate customer? And finally, are we cooperating or are we competing with the cybersecurity industry? Now, you probably can tell from what I've said, my answer to all of these would be, we are cooperating with incumbents. We are following the MGA distribution model. We would be insurance driven and technology driven. We would hope to be regulated. We would follow the ultimate customer and cooperate with the cybersecurity industry. But all of those objectives are hard to meet. So my conclusions from this quick talk would be, cyber risk is a mission critical for most companies. There's really little doubt about that following what we've been through in the world in the last 12 months. The cyber insurance market, it's growing fast, but so are the risks. And we can't afford to simply focus on how quickly we can grow. You know, we have real opportunities. The opportunities are real, but we need better customer solutions in order to really capitalize on those opportunities. The skills gap and the low customer awareness are real challenges for this industry. Insurtechs can serve the insurance industry and or the customer. So we can serve both. The MGA model effectively serves both, really, but you want to have a primary focus on who you're trying to help. There is a lot of money riding on insurtech success or failure in cyber. As we saw, you know, a lot of money has been already raised, and that's at risk. You know, a lot of these companies will not succeed long term. And finally, you know, if you're going to plot a path to insurtech in the cyber area, you need strategic clarity around your purpose and the value you're seeking to add, because it's all about the result and not about the technology. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, great presentation. Thank you very much. And I really do believe that cyber risks are just the other side of the same coin, the coin of digitalization, especially if you consider the last report of all states about 17,000% increase of cyber assaults in the United States, especially in ID theft protection, ID theft, and so on and so forth. So, how do you think your sector could deal with this challenge? I mean, this huge increase in cyber issues.
Yeah, I think it all begins with education. The figures we've shown in the presentation and everything you're seeing in the world today leads me to conclude that better education of small and medium-sized businesses better education of private individuals, trying to make people understand that this is not something to be frightened of or to be scared of. This is simply the way our lives have changed. You know, if people understood that the threats are real and there is no avoiding them, then I think they would take better decisions about ownership of their data, about controls they put in place in their business, about meeting certain mandatory minimum standards. And then the supply chain issue, as if small businesses and private individuals are taking this seriously and big companies take it seriously, we create a system that is secure by design. But it does begin with education. We simply have too many companies, too many business owners who really don't understand what cyber really is and why it's relevant to them.